Yes, a few words of welcome from me too. This has been a very long time in the planning. I think it was near the beginning of the year, actually, I spoke to Rick. And this is, in fact, the first of 4 such evenings we've got planned through the coming year. And when we put it in the St. Mary's diary way back, perhaps in January or February, I was wondering whether it would ever happen. And here you are. And it's wonderful to see you. And we've got people Zooming as well. We've already raised, I can announce, about £900 in advance of this evening, which is really great. So I hope you will be generous because, of course, we couldn't do our house collections in May, and other Christian Aid events have had to be cancelled. But here we are this evening. I just want to put my other hat on now, my sort of storytellers and sort of poet, but I don't call myself that-ish hat on, and just give you a brief introduction to what I'm doing this evening. I started preaching through storytelling when I was a school chaplain. And I started doing it because the boys would listen to stories when they would switch off for most other stuff. And then when I went to Salisbury Swinwell's Theological College to teach Old Testament studies, I developed the practice further, a sermon in the form of a story. And then to my surprise, I started writing a few in short lines because I don't think I've written any poetry since I was courting my wife, which is rather a long time ago now. So, and yet I found that poetic speech would allow me to say things that ordinary prose wouldn't. So there we are. And the theme of this evening is the great feast of Christmas. And Brian and Claire and I are going to celebrate that and explore that in our words and music. And I must say, I'm extremely grateful to Brian and Claire for helping out, because it would be just interminable if I were to give you 7 pieces of mine with no musical interludes. I also should say, before I begin, that I'm extremely grateful to Rick and all the people, and Mike and all the people here at St. Mary's. They've eased my path so brilliantly all along. So, to the first piece, and this is an Advent piece. I thought, although we are focusing on Christmas, I thought we ought to begin with an Advent piece because we're still in Advent. That's informing some of my Quaker friends. And this is a piece I preached in Chester Cathedral on Advent Sunday in 2005, relatively soon after a disturbing earthquake in Kashmir, to which I make a passing reference at one point. Christian Aid didn't pass by so quickly. Because it was preached and written for 2005, it makes no reference to a pandemic or Brexit or anything of that kind. But the Old Testament reading that day came from Isaiah and included a very striking verse, which I turned over in my mind and explored towards the end of my poem. And Katy, Rowe, who is a member of the Chester Christian Aid Committee, is now going to read that verse for us.
O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you our potter. We are all the work of your hand.
So I've called this simply Waiting for God. Once more, the wheel of the year has turned. We are back at the beginning, at this precious time of waiting. 4 weeks of it. We've come out of the crush of Eastgate Street and the queues at the tills to this place of waiting where we can sit and listen, a place where the rush stops, where the television is not switched on with its nervous chatter of the world's disasters and its sorting through the pickings of our wickedness. No emails can reach us here. And if the mobile phone should ring, then we will quickly turn it off, our faces redder than before. We have turned aside to this patch of holy ground to sit and wait, at this time precisely set aside like Lent for waiting. 4 weeks now of waiting, 4 weeks. The insistent world in which we live would have us want things now, at the click of a button, the blink of an eye, but we have turned aside to wait in God's good time. So what are we waiting for? For God to come and take us home, to lead us up her garden path, past trees of wisdom and of life, to open wide the door, cheer our spirits, chase off the gloomy clouds of night, to close the path to misery, put on the kettle, sit us down to tea and cake and make us laugh again. As darkness falls, we wish to sit with her and hear her tales, words that will not pass away. We want our favourite story once again, the one we think we know so well, of journeys and a moving star, of a birth without pain, and a child who never cries, of shepherds smelling of angels, and the wisest of kings bending low with gifts in outstretched hands to a mother who is not tired at all, and a man who does not mind the child is not his. We want our make-believe. God will tell it differently if only we will hear. But that is not for now. For now we wait, and waiting still we wait. Waiting for God is surely a strange occupation, for God is all about us in the wild skies, in clouds unraveled by the wind, the sun that turns the trees to gold and sea to dark egg blue, in the gorse that flowers, even in the frost, the shades of winter bracken, the lifted wings of swans, the winter cries of scaling geese, in the kindness of strangers, in acts of unexpected courtesy, the fresh companionship of old friends, the love of those whose wedding is near, the delight of small children, and the quiet courage of the old, in the banter of hospital wards, in all paying of attention and all showing of care, all understanding and forgiving, all making of peace, all whistleblowing where whistles should be blown, all standing firm for truth and striving for what is just, all giving and acquiring of dignity, in all searching and finding of mystery, and all humility. We are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses. How can we wait for God who's already arrived? Because things are not all sweetness and light. Need I spell it out? Scratch every arm, and the blood of pain will come fast welling to the skin. We have other tales to tell if we dare tell them, even if we are not sitting in the ruins of earthquake, flood, fire, or riot, even if we are not holding in exhausted arms our precious child, limp, pain-racked, dying of hunger, even if we are not high-walled and road-blocked into Bethlehem to celebrate the coming of the Christ child in an empty church. Sometimes it seems God is more than just 4 weeks away. And so we wait. We all wait. What icon shall we carry with us for this pilgrimage of Advent? For waiting is not sitting still, but moving on to God's own destination. We are the clay, and you are potter. We are all the work of your hand. That will do just fine. We will imagine you, great God of this vast universe, so far beyond our grasp, with your hands on the wheel, holding us together, keeping us whole, stopping us flying off at a tangent to land in pieces on the floor, pressing us, moulding us, smoothing us, bending us, teasing us into shape, then glazing us, firing us, holding us up for the light to catch. This golden image we will take on our journey, for it brings you so near, O God. For what could be closer than a potter to her clay? And we would dearly love to think of ourselves as your fine handiwork. And you, dressed in an apron, washing dirty hands and fingernails. Dressed like that, O God, you will not seem out of place when Mary's time has come and the women gather round. The next 4 pieces, all in prose and each one of them short, I wrote for a single carol service in the cathedral in 1996. I gave each story a contemporary setting and included in them a few memories of pilgrimages I had made to that remarkable but deeply troubled part of the world we sometimes call the Holy Land. When writing the first of these stories, The Shepherd's Tale, I pounced upon the suggestion I'd come across in one of my commentaries on Luke, the scholar was suggesting that Luke was thinking of the shepherds as nomads, because he pointed out that settled shepherds would bring their flocks and herds back to the village pens for the night, because you see, there were Asiatic lions out there then. They weren't just in Chester Zoo. And there were bears and wolves too. So I have turned the shepherds in my tale into Bedouin.
Luke chapter 2, verse 8. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night.
The Shepherd's Tale. We see your coaches driving down from Jerusalem to Jericho, stopping off for souvenirs at the Inn of the Good Samaritan. You take the old road, then stop to clamber up to the cross on the ridge overlooking the Wadi Kilt, with its view of the hills of the desert and the monastery of St. George, of Jericho one way and Jerusalem and those wretched settlements the other. We come to sell you trinkets, or we let you sit in one of our black tents for a few shekels while your guide tells you about our way of life. You smile at us and in 10 minutes, with your guide's help, try to understand us. Outside, you listen to us piping our sheep and goats down to the water in the bottom of the wadi and get quite carried away. Or you laugh behind your coach windows at the television aerials standing beside our tents. But you don't really take much notice of us, for you think we are not sophisticated like you. We live on or beyond the edge of civilization, you suppose, because you equate civilization with your own lifestyle and think wise men come from the West. Nomadic peoples have always been in receipt of others' contempt, ever since those others decided to settle down and build walls and call the land their own. We have always seen things differently and not played your games. You have never trusted us. But I will tell you the truth. We live closer to the earth than you do, and that means closer to heaven also. We know every line of the earth's face and every star by name. Our ancient stories say we have been here since light first came upon the earth. So it was hardly surprising that we recognized again the light of creation when it shone that night over Bethlehem. It was the light of the first day when God said, "Let there be light." It was the light of Eden and the burning bush, the same light as shone later on a mountain of transfiguration and on the morning of resurrection. We knew the angel song too. We'd heard it at the world's beginning when the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. We well remembered that ancient joy of heaven. And so naturally we went to Bethlehem to join in the party. Do not despise us. We have been here a long time and have seen and heard what you all long for. Listen to the earth. Look for the light of creation. Keep your ears open for the joy of heaven. Bethlehem, small and unremarkable, caught between the desert and grand Jerusalem, did not come as a surprise to us, nor that simple crowded home, nor the young couple and the child newborn in the hay, wrapped in its warmth against the winter cold. None of that surprised us. We have been here a long time and have always kept close to the earth and known the rhythms of heaven. Yet you may find it all strange, too simple, too tucked away out of sight, too smelly, and far too ordinary. It was not too ordinary for us, thank God.
Genesis chapter 28, verse 12. Jacob had a dream. See, a stairway stood upon the earth. The head of it touched the heavens, and see, messengers of God going up and down on it. And from Luke chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. Suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favours.
The Angel's Tale. I saw you when you were first made. I saw your very making. I watched as God took the clay in his bare hands to form a man. I watched again as he took that man's side and built it into a woman. I saw the delight in his eye. I saw the intimacy with which you were made and knew it was the intimacy for which he created you. I recognized that intimacy, for I had enjoyed it myself since before creation. I thought you would always possess it, but you slipped out of God's hands, lost yourselves, and lost him also. You forgot his touch, the play of his breath on your face, the beat of his heart against yours. You took to imagining he was trapped in heaven, above the solid barrier of the firmament, while your feet were set too firmly on the earth. God in heaven and you on earth, and never the twain shall meet. That is what you believed. So one day we set up a stairway reaching from earth right up to heaven. Jacob saw it at Bethel. Its stairs were not empty. It was full of us angels ascending and descending upon it. Heaven was speaking to earth, for we were God's messengers and carried in our bulging pockets his secrets and his love letters addressed to you. More than that, God came down that stairway himself. Jacob that night found him standing beside him. Jacob that night heard him say he would never leave him. Jacob heard and saw the truth. The stairway between earth and heaven remained, and still it stands. Still we go up and down it about the same business. Still the door of heaven stands open, and still God comes down it himself and stands beside you. Still he reminds you of the ancient intimacy of Eden. Still he promises you never to leave you. And his generosity is just the same. Remember, Jacob was up to his neck in deceit and cruelty when God met him at Bethel. He had nothing but the hatred of his wronged brother behind him, and ahead a long journey to an uncertain conclusion. He was not good enough to meet God. We never are. But God came to him nevertheless. It is his way. We never deserve his coming. Yet you forgot that stairway. It opened heaven wide and brought God down to earth, but your eyes were not open as Jacob's were. You fell back into the old ways of imagining a great gulf fixed between you and God. You made life very lonely for yourselves, and for God also, for your company means so much to him. And then came Bethlehem, and the cry of a newborn child in the quietness of the night, and that carnival in heaven. The mayhem was our doing. All heaven was let loose. The world had not seen such a thing since it was made. The morning stars remembered the song they had sung then and declared ours even finer. Quite a compliment. And no one saw, and no one heard, except a few Bedouin keeping it in turns to watch their sheep and goats. All heaven let loose, and hardly anyone noticed. It was and is passing strange. And so we turn to Matthew and his gospel, and first to his story of the wise men. The wise men in my story do, I'm afraid, come from the West.
Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem.
We were used to the delights of high table, the Georgian silver, the attentive waiters, the feasts to mark special occasions, the wines, each carefully chosen by the steward to suit its particular course, the decanters of port and Madeira, the Latin graces, the portraits against the oak panelling, the intricacies of the beamed roof, the brilliant conversation, and the talk over coffee in the senior combination room afterwards. Such a scene was duplicated many times over in the various colleges of the university. It was a golden age. Yet even in such a place at such a time, we were famous, for each of us was a Nobel Prize winner twice over, and 3 of us in one college. Not that we saw as much of each other as you might imagine, for each of us was in demand throughout the world. We lived half our lives in aeroplanes, in hotels, in other people's universities, in conferences and large packed halls with people hanging on our every word. Our books were discussed not just in learned journals, but on television shows. Most of our invitations we had to refuse. Each of us, in his or her way, was teaching the world to see itself differently, so we were told. Together, people said our visions spelt an intellectual revolution of the significance of the Renaissance or the Enlightenment. Absurd talk, but not unpleasant. Why then did we slip away together one day, leaving behind our high table and our books and word processors, and go to Bethlehem? I cannot tell you, except that our lifelong search for truth compelled us. To be precise, it drove us to Jerusalem, to the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. There, we somehow imagined we would reach our destination. They listened to us, then told us we had not yet arrived, though we did not have far to go. They were very helpful, though for some reason they would not accompany us on the final stage of our journey. The next day we walked the few miles to Bethlehem. They put us on the right road. I don't know why we walked. We could have taken a taxi, of course, but that did not seem appropriate. At the roadblock near the edge of the town, the soldiers regarded us with obvious suspicion. We're not used to pilgrims on foot, they said. They body searched us, questioned us for half an hour, then let us through. It was the first time we realized we were on pilgrimage. We did not seem to share the piety of the pilgrims we'd come across in Jerusalem. We had thought them too organized, too credulous, too caught up in all the razzmatazz. We'd seen them trotting after their guides like children going to one holy site after another, constantly supplied with holy thoughts and told to think them. We were surely after some larger truth than that. And so we were. And we found it in Bethlehem. For there we met a child, a small child, very small, a baby a few days old and older than creation. And there in Bethlehem, we rediscovered the laughing child within ourselves. And for the first time, against all our old, carefully nurtured expectations, found the child in God. We brought him our learning, our cleverness, our genius, as it was called, and gave them to him as all we had to offer. He received them most graciously. He could see the gladness in our eyes and wanted nothing more. We met some local Bedouin who'd got there before us. As they embraced us, it seemed we had known them for a lifetime. They took us to their tents and gave us the most wonderful feast we had ever had. And we sat outside beneath the bright stars and kept long silence together. There was a bond between us which could never be broken, and a shared wisdom which could never be lost. For we had met truth in its entirety and its eternal simplicity, and had been deep warmed by the very love of God. Matthew's stories of the birth of Jesus are much darker than Luke's and include one story which is pitch black. I mean the slaughter by Herod's soldiers of all the children of Bethlehem 2 years and under, a massacre which Jesus escapes by the skin of his not yet grown baby teeth. Again, I've set the story in the 1990s, and towards the end I'd made use of an account I'd read of an incident involving Israeli soldiers in the West Bank town of Ramallah. When writing my story, I kept faithfully to the details of that account. With the rest, I have let my imagination loose, while recalling the refuseniks, the conscientious objectors in Israel, those young Israeli men and women who were courageously refusing to do national service in protest against the way the Israeli Defense Force treated their Palestinian neighbors.
Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. Herod sent his soldiers, who killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under.
The soldier's tale. I won't keep you long. I've plenty I could tell you, but I can't bear to think of the words for most of it. We were only obeying orders. We were at the end of a long chain of command, the wrong end. Killing children is not all that peculiar. We weren't the first and weren't the last either. Jericho, Auschwitz, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, Bethlehem. It's all the same, except that we were told to leave the adults alone and any children over 3. The other places were worse than that, and the killers weren't so choosy. Some of us got quietly drunk before we started, the only way we could cope. We had orders only to take the little ones, as I've said, though we had to give some of the women a right beating to get the babies from them and get them off our backs. When we'd finished, they loaded us into trucks to take us back to Jerusalem. I was dead lucky. They put me in the last one right at the back of the convoy. Halfway back, I jumped out. The others didn't move when I got out. Good luck, the corporal said, and gave me a bit of a shove, and that was that. I knew the lie of the land. I'd been brought up nearby, see. The desert was close. They'd never find me there, I thought. I knew some of the Bedouin. They'd give me shelter and a change of clothes and enough food and drink to get me to the border. They did too. Then the rain came in buckets in the hills and the waters got full of water. And when I climbed down into one, I'd strip off my clothes and wash myself all over. But I could never get myself clean. It felt as though the blood of those babies had soaked right through my skin, and I'd have it all dark and spoiled inside me till the day I died. After a bit, I made it to Egypt. I tried to disappear. But the faces of those babies still followed me. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to go back and give myself up. On the way, I bumped into a young woman and her husband. They had a child with them. He was very small, still a baby, really. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, though God knows I tried. Where are you from? I asked. We had to escape from Bethlehem a while ago, they said. There was a terrible massacre. All the children under 3 killed. Can you imagine? We got out by the skin of our teeth. We're not going back. We're finished with Bethlehem. Going up north instead to Nazareth. They saw me looking at the baby and noticed the look on my face. The mother hesitated. She suddenly realized I'd been a part of it. I'm sure she did. But then she said, "You won't believe this. Do you want to hold him for a moment?" And before I could say anything, she put him in my arms. So many of us deserted after the massacre. They've stopped looking for us. At least that's what they say. I work in Ramallah now, an Arab place north of Jerusalem. There was trouble in the town the other day. I expect you read about it in the newspapers. Some things they didn't tell you, though. The soldiers were using high-velocity bullets that explode inside you. See this scar? A doctor and I were bending over someone who'd been shot. He was bleeding heavily. We were right inside a room on the 5th floor of a block of flats. The soldiers must have been using telescopic sights, and they can't have missed our uniforms. We were wearing white coats, after all. But they shot at us all the same. One of their bullets hit the doctor smack in the head. I just got shrapnel in the back and in my shoulder. Another team went up for the man we'd been trying to help, and somehow they managed to get him out, and the doctor and me as well. The man's still alive. The doctor isn't, of course. I will fight and work for justice until I die. That baby on the road from Egypt and his mother, they showed me what I had to do. Showed me I was forgiven too. I could feel it strong when she handed him to me and I held him in my arms. It was like holding the fire of God. Back to short lines and to St. Luke, and to 2005 in Chester Cathedral, the same year in which I preached my first piece. This time we go to Christmas Day. If we look carefully at Luke's famous story of Jesus' birth, we notice he mentions no stable, let alone a filthy one, nor does he talk of Mary and Joseph being turned away. There were probably no inns in Bethlehem at the time because it wasn't on a pilgrim route. Luke doesn't use his usual Greek word for an inn. And I think, although this translation is very cumbersome, I think we should translate the word we normally translate as in the room where they were staying. And we should imagine some of Joseph's relatives giving him and Mary lodging. I guess that is what Luke would have expected us to imagine. Bethlehem was a hospitable place, and it still is.
Luke chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. The time came for Mary to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her son, her firstborn, and she wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, for there was no space in the room where they were staying.
In the dark of the world's turning, a small light shines. No flash of an explosion, none is shaken out of bed or terrified out of their wits, no glare turned into the face to make one shield one's eyes and tremble at the questioning to come. No beam sent searching the black sky for enemies to find them and destroy. Nothing remarkable at all, you might think, until you see the angels all a dance. The good people of Bethlehem and the bad sleep on undisturbed and wake the next day believing nothing has changed. Only one family in one small house has had a sleepless night, for they could not let a girl have her child on the street or in the cold of a ditch. They embraced her and her young man with the warmth of Bethlehem hospitality, gave her room for the birth, sent for the neighbors to help. There was hardly room for them all in the stumbling dark of the night. Women from the houses next door, the women of the family, the grandmother who'd seen it all before so many times, the mother who had 4 of her own, and the eldest of her daughters fetching and carrying and standing on tiptoe trying to see. Frightened for this Mary whom they'd never seen before, who was so young, so far from home and the women she knew, no mother to attend her, so bewildered by it all, as if she was taken by surprise while the waves of pain crashed upon her and she did not know whether her child would ever turn towards birth or would die shut up inside her, and she herself would not survive, but find a shallow grave so far from Nazareth. Yet in the dark of the world's turning, the light does shine, and the narrow streets of Bethlehem are filled with sheep and goats, led by shepherds come to warm their hands around the fire of God. They too have had a sleepless night, kept awake by angels who stole their pipes, brought in drums and trumpets, turned their quiet fields to carnival, told them they could not rest till they had been to Bethlehem and seen for themselves. So they have bent their heads into the house as well, followed by their animals, to join the ox and ass, while the women of the family have brought them food and drink. And they have greeted a young man they have never seen before, who says his name is Joseph and cannot keep the smile off his face. They stand eating and drinking, looking into the manger, seeing for themselves what the angel said they must see, knowing they will never be the same again. And in the dark turning of our world, that same small light shines to make us glad, and know we will not be the same again. Do not mistake, that child was not born to drag us screaming into merriment. We are told by so many at this dark time of year, we must be happy, as if cheerfulness is compulsory until the bright festivities are over and the usual routines are resumed. Yet that is hard, crushing hard to bear, if death and grief have come too close. If the consultant has confirmed too many of our fears, if love has gone cold, if we are bullied or abused, if drugs or booze have had their bitter way, if debt has risen to the roof, if this Christmas, like the rest, we are alone. But did you know one of the shepherds had just lost his wife? And the mother of the house where the child was born had buried 3 of her own stillborn, the last just days before. They needed more than most to see that child lying so small, so alive in the hay, to find the miracle of it all, to sense the warmth of it coursing through their veins, to know they touched the very truth of God. The ground had rocked beneath their feet, cracked open, leaving them reeling on the edge. Beside that manger, they stood on the world's bedrock, unshakable. They had not known which way to turn, but when the child was born, they found the gate to God's garden. They'd wondered whether anything mattered anymore, but then felt God's gentle, strong embrace wrapped round to keep them from the cold. They knew this child was not for them alone. Although they held him close, the truth of this child's birth, the pain of it, the fear of it, the relief of it, was the world's meaning and the world's peace. Nothing else could compare. They knew that in that house, no different from the rest, God himself had come to birth. And as they gazed upon him lying in the hay, the old idols came crashing down. No more the God enthroned in distant splendor, surrounded by his sycophants. No more the God who clicked his finger to decide between life and death. No more the God who rode into battle to leave the ground strewn with the bodies of those who dared contest his power. No more the God who shoveled the dead into the monster's mouth of hell, lest the comfort of his heaven be disturbed. The God who'd come to birth in Bethlehem had no power at all except the power of love. And what great power that was, that is. It fills the hearts of those who look upon him. It fills the house, flows down the track towards Jerusalem, surrounds its grand temple, spreads north to Galilee and far, far beyond to reach streets that are strangely quiet. And people here who've been waiting 4 weeks for it to arrive. So now it is our turn to offer God our hospitality. Now, we've been jumping the gun, haven't we? We're still in Advent, and we've been talking about and singing about Christmas most of the time. And now it gets ridiculous. Because my last piece is a meditation on the story of the presentation of Christ in the temple, a feast which won't be celebrated by the church until February the 2nd. But I wanted to end on a triumphant note. We are in need of some triumph at the moment. Hope has begun to emerge again in our news bulletins, and the brilliant scientists developing the COVID vaccines have already triumphed to an extraordinary degree, as have the pharmaceutical companies working with them and the doctors and nurses vaccinating people. But we need more. We need the quiet, self-effacing, eternal triumph of God. Whatever our circumstances, we always need that.
Luke chapter 2, verses 25 to 28. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. This man was righteous and devout, looking forward to the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit rested upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death until he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Guided by the Spirit, Simeon came into the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what was customary under the law, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God.
An old man waiting. An old man waiting, waiting for his heart's desire, waiting for his God to move, to speak those ancient words again, let my people go. Waiting for him to clear the land of occupation, waiting for Rome to be put in its place. Waiting for the time when they will not hurt or destroy on all his holy mountain, and the earth will be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. An old man waiting for justice, for peace, for the consolation, the contentment of his people, waiting for the knowledge that all is well, that no longer will the fetid air sound to the beat of the helicopter and the crying beyond all bearing of the mothers and their children, nor the smooth paved street to the wail of the ambulance rushing to yet more pools of blood and bodies twitching in the grasp of death. An old man waiting for his heart's desire, while the soldiers look down through the smoke of sacrifice upon the courts of the house of God to make sure they are kept in good order and nothing gets out of hand. An old man waiting. He's been so for a long time, waiting for his God to emerge from his hiding behind that heavy curtain, to shake off the dust of holiness, to walk out into the world and see. He's been waiting all his life for the Messiah, as this old man Simeon, like the rest of us. Waiting for a Messiah, waiting for hope to win the day, waiting for God to do something, waiting for a song to sing. He's been waiting all his life. And this very morning, he opened up his breaking heart for God to overhear. You told me when my hair was black and my knees both worked, that I would not die before your fine Messiah came and hope was born anew. Well, my God, I wish you to know that the time now left to me is short. I can sense it in my bones. I've been waiting all these years through famine, pest and plague, through settlement and wall of fear and buses blown to bits. And here I am, my God, but not for many weeks or days. Must I die a hopeless death, knowing that you do not keep your word? My eyes are failing fast, my God, so sooner than I care to say, I will not see him if the Messiah comes. After all this time, I will not see. You have disappointed me too long, my God. Do yourself proud before I die. Let him come, your Messiah. Let him come and bring you from your hiding place. Let me die with hope, knowing it is not all a lie. Let me sing my song before it is too late, the music dried up in my throat. The curtain bends aside. Enough for a girl from Nazareth to emerge, carrying a child in her arms. She should have known better, of course. What was she doing, for God's sake, in the Holy of Holies? Feeding him with the milk of her breast? She slips across the court, head bent down towards her child, to leave this temple and its self-importance for the hills of Galilee, for a place where she will not be noticed and her child can play. She is almost out of the temple now when she sees an old man waiting and knows full well in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, that he is waiting for her, or rather for her child. He's waited all his life for this moment, for her, Mary of Nazareth, and her small child held against the beating of her heart. How can she refuse him? So now, this very moment, this most holy time, she stands before him, waiting for him to notice them. His eyes are shut against the light. He cannot look into the sun. The breeze stirs Mary's skirts, but he does not catch the movement. She says nothing, and he cannot hear the fall of her breath, and so she adds her waiting to his. And then the child cries, and the old man opens his eyes and sees. You can sing your song now, old man, the young girl says. Sing him a lullaby and calm his fear. There is too much of it here. The old man has not been waiting all this time for such a small Messiah. But slowly fighting the pain in his knees, he stands, straightens, stretches out his arms to receive the child. "Oh, Mary," is all he finds to say. She smiles at him, not asking how he knows her name. Yet still in his enfolding arms, the child cries with fear. "Sing him now your lullaby," the young girl says. "Let him ride home on the back of your song to where we will be safe. Sing now, old man, you've been silent for too long." So Simeon sings his song, sings of light and peace, salvation and glory, while the young girl turns her skirts and dances before him, dark eyes flashing, bare feet curling, slowly, gently spinning. To her quiet rhythms, the old man rocks the child, and all for that time is holy. And an old woman's fasting days are done. Anna, exiled Anna, has come home to Jerusalem, hoping for her God. This day, this hour, this song, this dance, she is not disappointed. For more years than she can tell, she's been bent towards the ground, and never could she sing, even as a girl. But now she joins Mary in her rocking dance, faster, faster, till they are stamping out their glee, and with the rest of their breath adding women's voices to the old man's song, while the child sleeps against his cheek. Such a day, such a day. And still the dance goes on. Their song is never finished, nor will ever end its Gloria. And so we ask you to leave by this door here. And if you could pop your